This has been a big week for markets and, of course, a big week for Americans. Not just the election and the market reaction, but key economic data that can set the stage for returns the rest of this year. Welcome to the Money Runner. I'm David Nelson. There was a red wave Tuesday, but it hit Florida. Governor Ron DeSantis and Senator Marco Rubio had huge nights. It was pretty clear the governor's victory speech was less about a celebration of another 4 years. It was about as close as you could get as kicking off a run for the White House without actually declaring. Elsewhere in the country, even as I'm doing this pod, a lot of races too close to call. It still looks like the Republicans will take the House, but it's certainly not going to be the tsunami margin many expected. Any shot for a flip in the Senate would have to wait for a runoff election in Georgia. Trump-backed Herschel Walker and Democrat Raphael Warnock neither got the 50% needed to secure victory, so it now heads to a runoff election in December. The rhetoric heading into this election was, as you might expect, over the top. Democrats would like you to believe that democracy was on the ballot. The truth is that Democrats and Republicans were on the ballot, and what took place was democracy in action. The biggest takeaway I get from this election is that voters are angry. They're angry about inflation, angry that Washington has turned a deaf ear to what they want, and more important, what they need. Coming into the vote, top of the list for voters was inflation and crime. One they feel every day as the cost of living forces many at the bottom of the income ladder to trade down. And the other sparks a rising fear that government can't or won't provide some of the basics like security and protection. The only reason the race for governor in New York, a solid blue state, became competitive was fear. Fear when you're standing in the middle of a subway platform because you're afraid some lunatic might push you on the tracks. Fear that another repeat felon will be let out by a tone-deaf DA who cares more about virtue signaling than doing their job. All of this was on voters' minds, but apparently not enough for some to cross to the other side. I think the exit polls said a lot. Abortion did not fade as an issue as much as the poll suggested, and Trump all in was a net negative. Elections are about the future and less about litigating the past. There are a lot of voters that want to look ahead and see Ron DeSantis as their choice for the top of the ticket in 24. Both sides of the aisle are going to have to take a long, hard look at some of the candidates they backed and how campaign funds were allocated. Let's be honest. Some of these candidates on both sides are not Senate or congressional material. So what does this all mean for your money and for markets? Well, first rule in medicine is do no harm. Anything that stops the flood of fiscal stimulus into the system will help alleviate some of the inflationary pressures, making it just a tad more likely that Fed policy can succeed. It does no good for the Fed to drain liquidity in the system while Washington pours it back in. All of this begs the question, why do investors want a divided government or gridlock? I think Elon Musk said it best with this tweet. Shared power curbs the worst excesses of both parties. Even if the GOP manages to pull it out and control both the House and Senate, the president still has veto power. What does change is the conversation. Kevin McCarthy will likely become speaker, but maybe even more important for markets and investors is committee assignments. Maxine Waters will be out as chair of the House Financial Services Committee. Likely to step in will be Patrick McHenry from North Carolina. Senator Tim Scott could chair banking in the Senate. Remember, the chair controls the agenda, and that means you control the conversation. All right, it's time for winners and losers. This is my favorite segment. It was an election week, so obviously we got to turn to Washington. We talked about the two biggest winners at the top. Governor Ron DeSantis and Senator Marco Rubio walk away with solid wins, with DeSantis looking to use his victory as a setup for a run at the White House. This one for me is hard to understand, but John Fetterman was another big winner. Even with a very difficult to watch debate as he struggled with words on the heels of a stroke, the Democratic Party went all in with campaign stops by former President Obama, President Biden, and of course, millions in advertising. Count that as a flip to the Democrats, as this seat was held by retiring Republican Pat Toomey. On the losing side, Beto O'Rourke, the supposed future of the Democratic Party. Beto loses again, and it begs the question, will he return? Stacey Abrams loses again in Georgia, only this time in a governor's race. And of course, Trump-backed Dr. Oz failed to bring it across the finish line in the key state of Pennsylvania. Missing from the winner's circle, Donald Trump. While some of his candidates, like J.D. Vance, won in the Ohio Senate race, Oz clearly lost, and as of right now, Herschel Walker is headed for a runoff with Raphael Warnock in Georgia. If you like the pod, hit subscribe. And if you don't, tell us why. Don't forget to check out this week's Market Minute. Thanks for joining. I'm David Nelson.